Hi everybody, you're listening to Comics and History, episode number 104, part 2, Spotlight on Wonder Woman during the John Byrne years, continued. And welcome to the show. I am your host, Brian J. Rygate, and class is back in session. And folks, in part 1, I promised a few things for this second part of episode 104, so I'd better get started. Before I get into talk about key storylines from Byrne's 3-year run on the book, I should spend a couple of minutes talking about a very important concept which Byrne introduced during his run. It's a concept that has been picked up by pretty well every writer since Byrne's run ended. And it's the concept that Wonder Woman is the second most powerful character in the DCU. That's certainly a concept unlike a number of other initiatives taken by Byrne that was met with, I'll say, universal applause by the fandom. Certainly, Wonder Woman fans were very happy with this. Of course, they understood that Wonder Woman would not take the number 1 spot. The number 1 spot would be held by the company's flagship character, Superman. But still, here was an acknowledgement that the female character wasn't just the most powerful amongst other female characters in the company. She was the second most powerful character in the universe amongst both female and male characters. Sadly, I don't think Byrne gets enough recognition for introducing this concept, and it's one which he introduced early on and reiterated several times throughout his run. But sadly, I think a lot of people attribute this concept to other writers like Phil Jimenez or Greg Rucka or maybe even Jeff Johns. I mean, we've had different reality altering events since Byrne ended his run on Wonder Woman with Infinite Crisis, Final Crisis, Flashpoint, and Rebirth. And yet this idea, this concept that Wonder Woman is number 2 on the power chart in the DCU is one that has remained throughout. But again, much like Cassie Sandsmark, Byrne sadly doesn't get enough credit for this initiative, so it's my pleasure to point out here that Byrne does deserve the credit for a long overdue acknowledgement of Wonder Woman's power levels. Okay, so let's get looking at key storylines from the Byrne run. The first storyline, Second Genesis, of course, set up Wonder Woman's new status quo in Gateway City and introduced Officer Mike Shore. It also provided her second encounter with Darkseid. And also served to remind fans that Diana's place within the DCU wasn't quite as lengthy as it was pre-Crisis, because here Byrne did a pretty good job of providing text and art which provided a flashback to Action Comics 600, where Diana went toe-to-toe with Darkseid for the very first time. What made this story arc important here was that Superman was not at her side this time, so she would be squaring off against Darkseid and his minions alone. So the fight started in Gateway City. Scene shifted to Apocalypse, where Diana faced some pretty brutal punishment at the hands of Desaad before she got free. And then the battle spilled over into Themyscira, where several hundred Amazons died in the end. And it was the death of so many of their number that led to Hippolyta, who was already feeling guilty about her actions at the end of the Messner Lopes run on Wonder Woman, to become even more depressed and decide to vacate her role as ruler of Themyscira for a time. Certainly the loss of so many Amazons really hurt Diana as well. This story arc was also important in establishing early on that Mike Shore was a valuable colleague and confidant to Diana. He was given such an honor in that when the fallen Amazons were being given a memorial service, Diana insisted that Mike be allowed to stay on Themyscira to view the proceedings. This story arc also established early on that this was going to be a much louder run than Perez's run or Messner Loeb's run had been. Byrne has always been known as a writer who provides a lot of big, bombastic, over-the-top action, and that was on full display here in Second Genesis. It was also the first time where fans started complaining that Byrne was inflicting, through characters, too much physical punishment on Diana. And yeah, it was great that she was the second most powerful character in the DCU, so fans weren't worried about her being killed, but still, it seemed hard seeing her have to endure such brutal punishment on the printed page. And this is a complaint that would last throughout the entirety of Byrne's run. So following that initial story arc, Byrne started developing the character of the newly created Cassie Sandsmark. Diana would go to work for Helena, working, I guess, as a consultant. So providing Helena Sandsmark with some more information on the many different artifacts which she had in her office. And then what made things really interesting was that Cassie, being so precocious, would go into her mother's office and accidentally trigger an artifact that could then cause some chaos. One example being a golem type artifact that Cassie accidentally activated, and Diana had to go into action to take down this golem. And from the start, Helena was concerned about the direction that her daughter was taking vis-a-vis Diana. An interesting challenge for Diana was that she saw that Cassie had potential as a hero, but it was something which her mother did not want. And so Diana was really caught in that she certainly wanted to be a mentor for Cassie, but at the same time, Cassie's mom was also Diana's boss. So she had a fine line to tread. And early on, we could see Cassie wanting to do more, to the point where she took a couple of artifacts, including Hermes' sandals, put them on, and she found out that the sandals, along with the gauntlet that she put on, gave her strength and flight, but she had no idea how to control her powers. And so Diana had to go out and while she was encouraging Cassie to try to channel her mental energies into controlling her abilities, she would also have to say to Cassie, okay, that's enough right now. I can't get in trouble too much with your mom. But this is how Cassie started out as Wonder Girl, putting together that makeshift costume that I talked about in part 1. And in the beginning, she did not have any godly powers. Her powers came from the artifacts which she took from her mother's office. Okay, the next storyline involved Diana taking on the Barry Allen Flash, a young Hal Jordan as Green Lantern, and Doomsday. Well, not really. It turns out that these were all cloned beings. It was all the unfortunate result of an experiment gone awry. A scientist who was working on virtual reality type technology for his ill son lost control of the technology he was working with, and so Diana had to take on a Flash and Green Lantern and Doomsday, who had the full power levels of the 3 originals. And this was interesting again, in that it showed that Diana was younger than the other heroes, and her debut as a hero came several years after a number of the others made their debuts. So, for instance, when she took on this Flash and unmasked him, she did not recognize Barry Allen. She would not recognize the costume that was being worn by a fresh-faced cloned Hal Jordan. And then in terms of Doomsday, this was quite impressive, seeing Diana go head-to-head with Doomsday. Of course, Superman was quite concerned, given that in order to take down Doomsday, he had to sacrifice his own life. But here, Diana did not die. However, what happened was that her one hand in smashing the Doomsday clone turned to dust and disintegrated, and it certainly appeared like Diana was reverting into clay, which would then turn to dust. And as part of her journey towards finding out what was going on, Diana had to go into, I guess, something approaching the underworld, and she had to confront an even more feral Cheetah, aka Barbara Minerva. And Diana had to reach out to Barbara, who, thanks to the events of Underworld Unleashed, had become a really feral creature. And Diana faced a pretty wicked lashing at the hands of Cheetah, even though this was supposed to be more a metaphysical battle than a physical battle. On the surface, it looked like a physical battle, and it was one which Diana ultimately won. But she was still left in an awful lot of pain as a result. It turned out that Diana wasn't the only one who was reverting to clay. The other Amazons were reverting to clay. And it turned out that a supposed hero who had made his way into Gateway City, calling himself Champion, was actually Hercules in disguise. And this was all part of Hercules' revenge for his defeat at the hands of the Amazons many moons ago, as his punishment for seducing and then enslaving Hippolyta and the rest of the Amazons. Hercules had been forced to literally shoulder the entire weight of Themyscira. And so this was his way of finally getting back Uh,